13%. That is the actual hazelnut content listed on the official ingredient breakdown of the most famous chocolate hazelnut spread on the market. Sugar and palm oil both appear before hazelnuts on that ingredient list, since ingredients are legally required to be listed in order of quantity. So it is not really a hazelnut spread with some sugar in it. It is closer to a sweet oil-based spread with a small amount of hazelnut flavor added. Today we are making the real version at home, where roasted hazelnuts are the main ingredient instead of an afterthought, giving you a deeper roasted flavor, a thicker texture, and a spread you can adjust anywhere from dark and intense to sweet and creamy, all starting with nothing more than hot hazelnuts and a food processor. Start with 300 grams of hazelnuts, roughly 2 cups. Raw hazelnuts will technically work, but roasting them first is the actual difference between a spread that tastes vaguely nutty and one that tastes like real chocolate hazelnut spread. Roast the nuts at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 10 to 14 minutes, watching them closely during the final few minutes, since hazelnuts can go from lightly toasted to bitter surprisingly fast. You want a deep, warm aroma and a slightly darkened surface. If they smell like toast and caramel, they are ready. If they start smelling burnt, that bitterness will carry directly into the finished jar. Once roasted, rub the warm hazelnuts inside a clean kitchen towel to remove as much of the papery skin as possible. You do not need to chase down every last fragment. That would be a fantastic way to spend an afternoon accomplishing very little. Just remove the loose skins and the darker patches. Those skins carry bitter, drying flavors, so removing most of them makes the finished spread noticeably smoother and richer. Now, blend the nuts while they are still warm. At first, they turn into coarse crumbs. Then those crumbs start sticking together. At some point, the mixture may form a thick, lumpy ball that looks like your food processor has simply given up. Keep processing anyway. The friction from the blades is warming the nuts and releasing their natural oil, and the mixture generally passes through 4 recognizable stages: crumbs, damp sand, thick paste, and finally a loose, glossy nut butter. The transformation is the actual key to this entire recipe. The nuts are not simply being chopped into smaller pieces, their internal oil is being released and redistributed through the solids, creating the base of the spread before any chocolate flavor even gets added. Depending on your food processor, this stage can take 5 to 10 minutes. Stop occasionally to scrape down the sides so the blade can keep pulling everything back toward the center. If your processor is small or underpowered, work in smaller batches. And if the motor starts feeling hot, let it rest before continuing. A slightly longer blend is always a better outcome than burning out your appliance halfway through. Once the hazelnuts turn smooth, add 35 grams of unsweetened cocoa powder, about 1/3 of a cup. Then add 40 to 60 grams of icing sugar, starting on the smaller end of that range. You can always add more sugar later, but taking sugar back out of a finished spread is a genuinely difficult conversation to have with yourself. This version is already considerably less sugar forward than the commercial jar, but the sugar still has a real job to do here beyond sweetness. It balances the cocoa and adds body. Without enough of it, the cocoa can taste sharp and the hazelnuts can end up dominating everything else. Add half a teaspoon of fine salt, and if you want a softer, rounder flavor, a teaspoon of vanilla extract. The salt will not make the finished spread taste salty. What it actually does is make the chocolate flavor taste more present, and it keeps the overall sweetness from flattening every other flavor into one indistinct note. Blend everything together again. The mixture may look thicker than you expect at this point, since the cocoa powder absorbs some of the available oil. Add a tablespoon of neutral oil, hazelnut oil, or melted coconut oil, and blend once more, adding more only if the texture genuinely needs it. This is the step where homemade spreads most often go wrong. Pour in too much oil and you end up with a shiny layer sitting on top of a thin, watery chocolate paste. Add it slowly and in small amounts. You are adjusting texture, not filling a swimming pool. The finished spread should fall slowly off a spoon. Hold its shape briefly and still spread across toast without tearing it apart. For a more luxurious version, add 100 grams of melted chocolate instead of, or alongside, part of the cocoa and sugar. Dark chocolate creates a deeper, more intense flavor, while milk chocolate makes it sweeter and closer to the familiar commercial jar. A combination of 70 grams. Dark chocolate and 30 grams milk chocolate gives you a solid middle ground. Melt the chocolate separately and let it cool slightly before blending it in. A version made with real melted chocolate will firm up considerably more in the refrigerator, since cocoa butter hardens as it cools, while the cocoa powder and oil version stays noticeably softer. That gives you two genuinely different spreads from nearly identical ingredients, one behaving like a soft nut butter, the other closer to a truffle filling that happens to be willing to sit on toast. If you are enjoying tricks like this one, subscribe to this channel right now. It genuinely helps keep these practical experiments coming every week. From here, the remaining decisions are all about texture. For a completely smooth spread, blend longer and scrape the sides frequently, since more processing time releases more oil and smooths out the base further. For a more rustic version, stop while the paste is smooth but still carries a bit of texture, or reserve a small handful of roasted hazelnuts. Chop them finely and fold them in at the very end. Avoid adding water or regular milk if you want the spread to last, since water changes its storage life and can cause the mixture to spoil faster than it should. If you want a softer, milkier flavor instead, use milk powder, adding 1 or 2 tablespoons while blending and adjusting sugar and oil afterward to compensate. Milk powder brings the flavor closer to the commercial version, but it is entirely optional since hazelnuts, cocoa, sugar, salt, and oil are genuinely enough on their own. If you do not have a powerful food processor, you can start from plain hazelnut butter instead and mix in cocoa powder, icing sugar, salt, vanilla, and a small amount of oil by hand or with a simple mixer. It will not taste quite as fresh as starting from whole roasted nuts, but it is considerably faster and still gives you full control over every ingredient going into the jar. A standard blender can work in a pinch, though a wide blender jar sometimes struggles here, since the thick mixture tends to spread out toward the sides instead of falling back down toward the blades. A food processor generally handles thick paste like this one more reliably. A few troubleshooting notes worth keeping in mind. If the finished spread stays gritty, the nuts likely were not processed long enough, or they cooled down partway through and stop releasing oil properly, so blend again and scrape the sides often, rather than adding oil to mask the texture, since oil thins the mixture without actually making it smoother. If the spread is too thick, add oil 1 teaspoon at a time. If it is too thin, add more roasted hazelnuts or a small amount of additional cocoa powder, added carefully, since cocoa thickens quickly and can push the flavor toward bitter if you overdo it. If the flavor tastes flat, try adding a touch more salt before reaching for more sugar. If it tastes bitter, check 3 things: whether the nuts were over roasted, whether too much of the papery skin was left on, and whether you used an unusually dark cocoa powder, since bitterness is very often a roasting problem wearing a chocolate disguise. If it turns out too sweet, add more hazelnut paste and a small pinch of salt rather than more cocoa, since additional cocoa alone tends to make a spread both more bitter and drier at the same time. Transfer the finished spread into a clean, completely dry jar. Moisture is the real enemy of shelf life here. Use a clean spoon each time you dip into it and store the jar in the refrigerator, particularly if you added milk powder. The chilled spread will firm up considerably, so let it sit at room temperature for a few minutes before using it, or gently warm a small portion rather than microwaving the entire jar at once, unless you specifically enjoy cleaning a sticky chocolate eruption out of a container afterward. The overall cost advantage depends mostly on local hazelnut prices, since sugar, cocoa, salt, and oil are all genuinely inexpensive on their own. Hazelnuts are what determine whether this ends up being a budget-friendly recipe or a small luxury project. The real advantage, either way, is control. You decide whether the jar leans lightly sweet or richly sweet, whether the flavor sits closer to milk chocolate or dark chocolate, whether the texture is silky smooth or lightly textured, and whether hazelnuts are genuinely the main event or just a supporting flavor. You can even push the flavor stronger without adding more sugar by roasting a small, separate portion of hazelnuts slightly darker and blending them into the main batch, letting the darker nuts add intensity while the lighter, roasted majority keeps the overall spread from tipping into bitterness. Roasted hazelnuts for the body, cocoa for the chocolate, sugar for balance, and salt to sharpen it all. Once you know that formula, you can adjust it endlessly and never look at the ingredient label the same way again. The next video is already up. Go watch it now.